11:05.
It's 11:05 a.m. and the meeting of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission is called to order. We reestablish a quorum. Frank Thorwald,
Stephen Cooper,
Bill Robin,
Dale Nations on the phone.
and we have a quorum. We've already established previously that there's no conflicts of interest. Dale, we were talking about the previous minutes, which we have to do a separate motion on each one of them. I make a motion that the minutes of September 14th, 2018 public meeting be approved. Is there a second of that motion?
I will second the motion.
All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? No. That motion is carried. Second motion is that we approve the minutes of September 14th public hearing, Arizona Energy Partners. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
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 The motion carries. Let's move on to item 3, Arizona Energy Partners, resuming drilling of the 16-1. Dennis, do you want to start us off?
Arizona Energy Partners originally spudded this well, the 16-1, back in February, I believe.
A little louder, James.
Suspended drilling in early March of this year in order to be able to bring in a bigger rig. We've also gone through the well spacing exception hoops with Arizona Energy Partners for their ability to test for, drill for gas. They're before us today and they've been temporarily abandoned status, which we also approved earlier in July or September, but they're now wanting permission to re-enter the well and resume drilling to TD. And Jamie Hogue, consultant for AEP, Arizona Energy Partners, is here to make a presentation.
Please state your name.
My name is Jamie Hogue, representing Arizona Energy Partners. I've been before you at least at 2 other hearings talking about this well, so I'm not going to, hopefully unless you want some additional detail, I'm not going to drag you through all the information we previously provided. But if Dennis could get me to the next slide, I can give you a geological review. Provided most of this information in prior hearings, but wanted to just quickly summarize it for you so it's all here. This image basically is a geological take going from if you look from the down in the south Mogollon Rim as you head northeast towards Defiance Plateau. So it's about 100 miles across the Holbrook Basin. Obviously the different geologic stratifications that we have here. This well, the 16-1 well, while we have complied with the Commission's requirements to reclassify this well as a gas well, our primary targets are oil. So if you look down here, we talked about this in a previous meeting. I believe Dr. Nations had some questions. Our targets are the Devonian and the Pennsylvania Naco, targeting some regional stratigraphic traps in that area. And you can see they start to pinch out. Affiliates of AEP drilled a well to the section immediately to the east of this and found, encountered about 50 foot of Devonian, fairly porous and permeable. So we're hopeful that this well will have even better results than that well. In specific relation to the well itself, it's 20 miles east of Snowflake. Again, we've already come through for a spacing exception request so that we'll be allowed to test for gas. It's on a state trust land lease. Currently the well, when we stepped down in March, we had drilled for about 2,705 feet. Our final TD, or total depth, is anticipated around 4,000 feet. Again, primary targets, Devonian, Pennsylvania, and as we discussed in prior hearings, we will file a notice 24 hours in advance of resuming hearings or drilling, which is required. And Dennis, can you go to the next slide? I just wanted to provide a little overview. It's been 7 months since we actually stepped down off this well. We stopped drilling in March. I went all the way back on this slide to our initial application to drill, which was filed in 2017. If you look down here, March 2018 is when we started drilling this well and halted due to safety concerns. We were able to acquire a new, higher rated rig by April of 2018, so only a month later. But you can see the number of I've been here several times for this well. We've been through a number of iterations, and one thing, especially in relation to today's hearings, I wanted to point out, in February of 2018, we were prohibited from testing gas in this well, which is a bit inconsistent with the hearing you had today, where an entity had already tested for gas and was coming in for reclassification of a wildcat well. Just hoping that we can speed up this process in the future and maybe do some of these, make some of these decisions at single hearings rather than coming back month after month. I am working with Dennis and Rick to ensure that we understand the process fully, and in the future hoping to streamline. Again, we don't hope to ever stop in the middle of drilling a well and start again, but 7 months is quite a long time. And last slide, if you would. Given the amount of current public testimony that's been given by a number of concerned citizens in northeastern Arizona, wanted to take some time to just provide an overview of our drilling practices. These are only reflecting Arizona Energy Partners practices. I'm not speaking for the entire industry because I don't know what their practices are. But to address some of the concerns that have been out there, first of all, it's the second bullet point, but I think it's the most important because it drives so many of the other factors here. We use a patented water technology that reduces our water use by 70%. That same water can then be recycled. Let's say we have a drilling package of multiple wells. We would take that water to the next well and the next well, further reducing and improving that performance. So, for example, in just drilling a well, an average well to 4,000 to 5,000 feet might use 100,000 gallons of water. We're able to come in about 10 to 15% of that, up to 20 sometimes, depending on the specifics of the wellbore. That equates to about, an average Arizona household uses about 100,000 gallons of water a year. So we're using 10 to 15% of that. And that's pretty impressive, and that's not often talked about. As a result, reduced land impacts. We don't need as many tanks or pits on location to store that water, which greatly reduces truck traffic, the actual impact on the land itself. And I also want to clarify, we have no intention of hydraulically fracturing this well. It seems to be a topic that's brought up a lot. I appreciate the public comments had, but in this case, we aren't going to be using hydraulic fracturing in this well, either in the oil formations we're looking to, or upbore if we decide to test for gas, such as helium. Still don't intend to use hydraulic fracturing. And again, we've had representatives in this company have been active in the Holbrook Basin for decades, so they have lots of experience. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Commissioners? Yes, Dennis.
I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Nations.
Yeah, Jamie, on your diagram, the cross section, I presume that arrow indicates the location of your proposed well.
Dr. Nations, that's correct. That's roughly, that's 100 miles that's spanning that way, so that's about where we're at. If you can see, that's for the Devonian pitches out. Yeah.
I think you should label that location, that well location on that diagram.
Okay.
The other question I have relates to what you said, and maybe it's none of my business, but you said the well to the east
Yes.
drilled 50 feet of Martin Formation.
Cooper, you called in for the.
No, your location is down dip from that?
I'm going to put you in right now.
Yes, Dr. Nations, you're correct. It's the NMAL 15-1 well that was drilled by Petrosun in 1996. It encountered 48 feet of Devonian. And again, because we're down dip from that, we're expecting the results of this well to hopefully be even better.
What year was that?
1996.
96.
Can we just take a step?
Stratigraphic trap you're looking for, right?
Correct.
Can we stop for just a second?
With the basement of the defiance uplift.
Absolutely correct.
Dr. Nations, can we stop for just a minute? I just want to note for the record that we've had a call in to be further part of it, and I believe this is Lisa Test. Now you may continue. I just want to note for the record.
Yes.
Could you address the fracking issue again? I apologize because the call can come in.
Yes, and for those that are on the phone that can't see the presentation, I'll go quickly through the last slide I provided reflects Arizona Energy Partners' current drilling practices in the Holbrook Basin. The primary point I was trying to make is we use a patented water recycling technology that allows us to use 70% less water for drilling than other operators, and this is an average across the country, and that's for a well of a 4,000 to 5,000 foot depth such as ours. That in turn greatly reduces not only the amount of water used, but the amount of impact to the surface in the area, as well as truck traffic associated with drilling activities. And I wanted to make sure we got onto the record and clearly indicated we have no intention of hydraulically fracturing this well. So I'm happy to review any of the other components that you wanted, but I wanted to at least let the member of the public who joined us to hear that.
Could, this is Bill, also you compared the usage on this well with an average residential home. What were those numbers again?
According to ADEQ and EPA, the average Arizonan uses about 100,000 gallons of water a day per household.
Per year.
Per year per household. Let me clarify that.
Per year?
Yeah, per year, per household. Based on the activities that we've engaged in thus far on this well and the anticipated completion, our use per well is somewhere in the range to 10 to 15,000 gallons, which is much less than one average household uses in a single year. That number improves greatly as we start to drill additional wells, because we then recycle that water and mud and use it again at the next well. So the water savings become extremely important, especially as a drilling program, if there's a larger drilling program and more wells are drilled. When we recommence drilling on this well, we'll actually be using the water and mud we initially started using. There obviously evaporation has happened, so we will have to supplement some additional water, but you won't see 10, 20, 30 water trucks out there delivering water to the site.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Nations.
It's appropriate now. First of all, I want to commend the AEP for that drilling practice. I think that's definitely good. I'm concerned a little bit about, now this well's going to be drilled with mud to total depth. Is that correct?
That's correct, Dr. Nations, yes.
And how are you, when you go through the SUPI and the salt-bearing units, and how are you going to keep from having solution of the wall bore? Are you going to adjust the muds in that area, or what?
Dr. Nations, Frank Thorwell, let me add to that. Some of the other drillers have been using air to avoid issues when they're drilling versus water and mud to avoid those kinds of issues. What your comments?
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Nations, yeah, in our case, we do have air as well as mud and water available to us. I don't think, based on the drilling engineer that will be on location, we'll choose the path that's the safest for both the crew as well as the formations that we're trying to protect. In this case, we've already drilled this well, the 2,700 feet, and I believe we've cleared the Permian or the SUPI group. That portion of the well has already, casing's been set and cemented to surface, so that portion of the well is actually already in place, and those zones are protected already.
Okay, good.
Commissioners, is there any other questions?
Public comment. Any public comment?
Is there any public comment on this?
Actually, I do have a question. When they reuse the same mud, do the chemicals build up to like higher concentration?
Mr. Chairman, and I believe it's Lisa Test on the phone. Actually, no. You always have a mud logger on location who's constantly checking not only the water content but any chemical content in the mud, because all of those are going to affect your drilling efficiency as well as the safety. So no, that would be something that's extremely important to control for and not allow to happen.
Awesome, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, Dennis?
No question.
Do we have any motions?
I have a motion.
Go ahead, Commissioner Nations.
I move to approve the re-entering and resumed drilling application of the AEP 16-1.
I second that motion. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Commissioner Nations?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Is there any nays? No nays. The motion carries. You have your approval.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have one question, but it didn't have bearing on the vote. Will you, I'll probably try to get out there to do an inspection during that time. Do you have any idea when you're going to start up again?
At this point, we don't know. We've redeployed that rig because of the time it's taken to get to this level of approval. It's that rig's now I believe it's in New Mexico, possibly heading for Utah. But we have a TA on this well that expires, I believe.
In a year.
Yeah,
In a
it was
year.
a year from, I think now, October.
So it might be next spring.
Yeah, but we'll, once we know we're mobilizing, obviously we know more than 24 hours in advance that we're going to mobilize to get everything out
Yeah,
there.
right.
So we'll make sure to contact you. as
So it's
soon
a
as we
ways
know.
off.
At this point, that's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I need to know.
Let's move on to item 4, report of the Oil and Gas Administrator. Dennis, it's you have your first item of establishing future meeting dates.
Right. Is there any discussion from the commission? I don't know that we need to vote on it, but I proposed meeting dates. I'd sent those to you in an email. They're not on the board right now.
Was that a problem, those meeting dates for any of the commissioners?
No, as far as I'm concerned, those as proposed by Dennis are perfectly acceptable.
You gentlemen in the room, no? Okay.
Have no problem.
That's all that was. I just want to make sure there wasn't any feedback. They'll be spaced 6 weeks apart, except for stepping back 1 week before 4th of July week, and then they'll be 6 weeks apart at the end through the end of December.
If you could send those out on a calendar versus just in a, would be helpful.
Sure. Okay. So, next thing, there isn't much report on ADQ's underground injection control primacy update, except to say that the stakeholder discussions are finished. They're digesting whatever comments they got preliminary to writing the rule. They'll be writing the rule. The representative from UIC had spoken to me, or the rule writer, I guess, had spoken to me about whether we specifically had an interest in reviewing draft rules for Class 1 and Class 2 UIC wells, which I presume we will, but it's way early to know when a draft rule is going to be made available to us. So I'll just have to keep the commission informed. It's going to be January before I need to report on this again, I think. They've gone dark, if you will, and just writing the rules. So
Dennis, we should have input in that writing stage.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I've told them that they're perfectly happy with that too. So Commissioner Fireoven had asked me, we're moving on to the next bill, LPG underground storage facilities. They asked me what the status of reports on mechanical integrity tests and workovers on 6 cavern wells up in the Enterprise Products Adamana facility, and I hadn't received anything, but I have since received all 6 reports, and I haven't noticed anything that is out of the ordinary. I didn't read for a lot of detail, but I think that there are some of those storage caverns up there that are on a mechanical bypass, they call it, because of either some potential leaks they can't figure out, or just because of other mechanical problems with the caverns themselves. So they're not utilizing all 12 caverns that they've got up there. I'm going to try to go on an inspection up there sometime this fall, and I can report back to you what I find from that. Also, speaking of inspections, the Arizona Corporation Commission has a pipeline and safety division in which they have some jurisdiction over, at least over the Plains Bumstead facility near Luke Air Force Base. And I had talked to them about performing a joint inspection at the time, which would be mutually beneficial to the commission and to them. And so we're going to try to schedule that. I think we've got a tentative date of early December. So we'll don't know, our next meeting will occur December 7th, so I should be able to report on what I found on that inspection. The top port training that I had indicated I was going on, I did go. It was pretty good training, 3 days in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A number of topics were hit on. One of them was kind of of interest, even though we don't have wells in the state that produce oil and gas to the point of having liquefied petroleum, hydrocarbons, or natural gas liquids. We got tours of a couple of plants where they described how they separate the stuff, which was interesting to me from the standpoint of we have 2 LPG underground storage facilities and possibly a 3rd natural gas storage facility that may be proposed in the coming years. And so it just helped to build in my background knowledge in regards to how that process works and what it is that we're storing in salt caverns here in Arizona. The Suncor 1-24, the closure report's been submitted. It's a done deal. The well's been properly plugged and abandoned for our discussion and direction with them earlier this year. And I think the matter is closed. Both wells will be recorded with the Maricopa County Recorder, which we'd also requested. Upcoming inspections, as I mentioned, the thing with the Plains Bumstead facility and also Adamana, both LPG facilities, I hope to inspect before the year is out. There may be some wells drilling in the near future. Pollard Helium has an interest in opening up a whole bunch of opportunities for them. They've got 1 well that they'll be submitting an application for, and many more wells to come after that may require spacing exception hearings. But hopefully we'll be able to go out and inspect that 1 drilling well. Ranger has ongoing activities. I need to catch up with what they're doing. And there's some plugged and abandoned wells that I need to make sure site inspection that things were followed through properly there. So if I can find enough time to do all that before December 7th, I can report back to you at that time. And that's pretty much it for report by me.
Thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Not hearing any, we'll move on to item 5, discussion of geothermal issues. Dennis?
Okay, let me switch to a map here. The background is that there was a well drill in 1950.
What part of the state is this?
Well, I'll get to that. There was a well drilled by Waddell Duncan, I guess, the #1 Murray. It was in the very southeastern northmost portion of Cochise County. And just for reference, Joe Dixon provided a map for me here. This is in an area called the Pedregosa Basin. It is a potential target for oil. Been no success yet, to my knowledge. Blackstone Resources, I guess they call themselves Gusher State, had proposed 2 locations which are on the map there. Those wells were never drilled, but it would indicate to us that they were each in the same kind of horizons that whoever would drill the Waddell Duncan #1 Murray back in 1950, they were targeting also. But the point for bringing this up is that the Waddell Duncan #1 was plugged and abandoned in 1952. There's been activity as far as evaluating samples. It's not clear to me whether somebody has re-entered the well, but apparently there is some kind of geothermal condition in that well such that occasionally it flows fairly hot water. I first learned about that problem in some emails I got from the landowner who lives in Norway but owns this property down in southeast Cochise County, kind of just a little bit north of Douglas. And she was asking what to do, and the more information I got, the more I realized I'm not sure that the commission has much jurisdiction over this. I told her basically that if she owns the well, it would be her responsibility to control the flow of that well or to cap it. plug and abandon it properly or cap it in some way. She asked a number of questions in regards to what we could do to help her out, but since we're not a state agency with a budget, we're not really tasked with maintenance of wells like that. I had a short discussion with Mr. Zeiss in regards to our authority, and I wanted the commission to just be aware that this is kind of an unusual situations out there. The water has been tested once. It doesn't appear to have serious contamination problems like you might expect with hydrothermal conditions or a geothermal well, but it flows hot water, and it flows a considerable amount at times. For whatever reason, it started flowing again because they thought they'd stopped the flow. I've never been down there, I've never seen it. I've spoken to a neighbor that's been helping the landlord with this problem, and I understand there's like a 5-acre pond out there that it's just a natural depression where they allow this water to flow into, and it could be the livestock are drinking from it. It's not water that I think people would want to drink from because it's very hard, high TDS and high sulfate, which makes it taste nasty, but it's not going to make you sick or anything. It's just not water you want to drink, but it may be okay for livestock. But I want the commission to be aware that there's bizarre things out there.
What was the temperature, Dennis?
Well, this is all anecdotal information coming from sources that I can't rely on. Supposedly it's flowing at approximately 100 gallons a minute. Supposedly the temperature of the water is 125 degrees. I have some water chemistry. If you really want to dig down to that level, I can show it to you, but there doesn't seem to be exceedances of Arizona's aquifer water quality standards, which are the same as primary drinking water standards at the federal level.
That's Fahrenheit?
Yeah.
Any questions?
To me, this falls in the category of the numerous hot springs that exist in Arizona. There are many places where springs flow water that is elevated above surface temperatures. So, does this have any relationship to those natural springs?
No, not to my knowledge. I spoke to Joe Cook at the Arizona Geological Survey, and he doesn't know of any geothermal activity down there. Mike Conway of the Geological Survey mentioned to me that there is a company that uses the geothermal conditions in another well up in the north end of Cochise County for hothouse growing of onions or something like that. But
yeah, it's east of Flagstaff. What is?
No, this one's in Cochise County. It's way southeast. It's a private operation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Dennis, I have a quick question. This sits on private property. This is not state land from our understanding, correct?
Correct. Yeah, the blue with the hatchard is state land property. There's a lot of state land immediately east and southeast, but it is not on. It's definitely on private land.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What's our involvement in it? Because what was it, an oil well, exploratory well? Is that how it falls under us? Or?
It was a wildcat well for oil drilled in 1950.
Okay.
The records are so poor there's not even any indication it got a permit. I'm not sure what the history of the commission is prior to its creation in around 1958 as to what kind of permit was issued, whether state land did those kinds of things at that time or if it was some other entity or whether even were permits issued at that time. But there is a well file, but it's mostly filled with data, not with like correspondence and well history, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess the thought I have is if it was a well that properly went through our procedures and supposedly is plugged and abandoned and is flowing 100 gallons a minute, that starts to concern me because we were part of the decision process. But what do we do about something? I mean, that is, you're talking 60 years ago. where does this fit in our scheme?
Well, that's why I brought it up for discussion.
No, I understand that.
I don't know.
I was just trying to put it into words.
For context, my understanding is that most other states would have jurisdiction to do something with this well, but I guess you couldn't find anything in the statute that says that for us.
Dennis and I went through statute and rule and could find no jurisdiction for us. It's on private land. It was pugged and abandoned years ago.
Yeah.
We would have no jurisdiction over it.
So thank you for bringing it up for informational purposes. Let's move on to the next thing we have.
I think Mr. Cooper has a question, though.
Perhaps we could pass this information on to Department of Water Resources.
EDWR.
I thought about that. I don't know what jurisdiction they have, but if I can figure out.
But we're passing on information to them, and if they have no jurisdiction, so be it. But at least,
Yeah.
Or ADQ.
I spoke to DEQ. They don't. They're not interested in this. Wouldn't be an APP, Aquifer Protection Permit issue that they want to pursue.
I think it should be designated a hot spring, regardless of the origin of it, and be regulated along with any other water resource regulations that relate to hot springs. But there's another question here. What's the status of this Gusher State number 1-21?
No, they were never drilled. The permits were expired. The bond has been returned.
Oh, so they're dead.
Oh, they're gone. Yeah, that's just for reference for those of you that may have some history with the commission prior to me. Those were two sites that were permitted back in 2010 or I don't know when it was. A while back.
Leases expired during state trust land too.
Moving on.
For the interest of the commission, there is a lot activity. There has been a lot of activity in the past of drilling in southeastern Arizona around Tombstone and Bisbee, which showed signs of free oil in the drilling process. A number of wells were drilled, generally on the high points in that area, and each of those wells has been offset by additional tests, which proved to be just dry holes. But there's still potential in Arizona in the basins between the mountain ranges for deep occurrence of oil and in deep wells. For example, in the Cretaceous and the Pennsylvania, the Permian and the Devonian. So I'm encouraged. I'd like us to encourage future development or future exploration activity in southeastern Arizona. I relate it commonly to the Permian Basin in New Mexico and Texas, the potential for oil and gas production there. Whatever that means.
perhaps Dale could give that to the administrator and we can put it on the website.
Dale, did you hear that?
I didn't hear that. What?
Would you give that to Dennis so he could put that on the website, that information?
Yeah, it's currently on my presentation that I think he has already. The oil and gas potential in Arizona. It's a PowerPoint presentation.
Good.
Moving on.
So
That's all I have.
okay. Let's move on to the next item. Report by the chairman. The only thing I have to report at this point is we're continuing to move forward with the AZOGCC, and as information becomes available, we'll make it available to the other commissioners for their comments. Next item, legislation affecting the Oil and Gas Commission. Dennis, is there any?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Then the next item is the call to the public. Is there anybody that would like to make any comments, statements? Anyone on the phone?
I'm okay.
Okay. Hearing that, we are going to go into executive session.
Mr. Chair, since we have someone appearing telephonically, perhaps we could take out of order items 10 and 11 and then
Yeah.
do the executive session.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's a good point. Items 10, review and consideration of future agenda items. Is there any items we want to put on the agenda for the future? Okay. Any announcements? No announcements. In that case, we will go into executive session. Do I hear a motion to go into executive session? I move we go into executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're in executive session.